Okay, I have about 104, 105. I got 102 up there. Okay, so I'm just going to do quick housekeeping, and then we'll get started. A nice compact group here today, so hi, nice to see you guys. I'm Landon Bartley, Senior Planner for the city. I think I've met just about everyone here so far, so that's great. Third practitioner meeting that I've held. It's March 1st. Someone told me this morning, hey, you're wearing the exact same clothes that you wore at your first practitioner meeting. So if you're watching on Facebook, or if you check out the video, which will be recorded and available ASAP after this meeting, this is the March 1st informational meeting, the third one, and I need to learn how to expand my wardrobe. Bathrooms are outside down the hall. Women's that way, men's on that corner. I mentioned the video will be available on YouTube. It is on YouTube right now. It's live, and also we'll be recording this and post it on the marijuana page, but also if you search City of Grand Rapids YouTube, it'll be available on there as well. Feel free to stop me if you have questions. Also, I have this on streaming live on Facebook, and I'll try to remember to continue to refresh continuously to see if there are questions that are coming in. A couple people I want to point out to those of you in the room. First, we have Angelica de Jesus. She is going to be reviewing applications with me. So just that you're aware that she's working in our office now. She'll be reviewing the applications, but continue to, I'm not giving her email or phone number right now, continue to send your comments or concerns or questions to me. Also, there is a sign-in sheet outside. Please do sign in, even if you do it at the end of the meeting. And also the handouts, this presentation is a handout, and also will be available on the website. Other person I want to point out is AJ Hills. He is with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and he is the guy that will be your main contact for micro LBE questions. I added him to the website recently. Just pull that up so that his information's on there. We've updated the website, trying to be continually updating this, and his information is right there. So you can look up AJ as you need to, and also they have a page with a list of suppliers that are micro LBE suppliers, so make sure to check that out. Okay, I'm gonna get right into it. Pull this up. Today I want to go over the MIVEDA, because that has been this meeting is intended to sort of be the last minute thing. We have our application window starting on Monday. So I just sort of want to go over the process from here on out. I think we've covered the ordinance enough by this time. The MIVEDA has been the source of so many questions, so I want to go over that. Then also just details on the process, fees, how to pay them, how you might get refunds if you need to, how we'll be reviewing applications and over what time period, details about the draw, a little bit of review of the influence areas, and then how we'll use that draw and influence areas to create the queue and a timeline for actual consideration by the Planning Commission. A little bit of information about other applications, how you can see what your friends, neighbors, and competitors are applying for, and then still have time for Q&A. I don't think we'll take up a full 2 hours. I'm going to try to move through this stuff fairly quickly, but again, if there are questions, if you're watching on Facebook, drop them in there. I'll try to refresh, and stop me anytime if you have questions, unless you think that we're going to cover it in the future, right? So that's why I'm covering the agenda right now, so that we can get to those. So that said, any questions right now? I wanted to mention one thing about AJ Hills in the back. He's going to be able to be here until 2 o'clock. So if you have specific questions about micro LBE, just get up and go talk to him. He can go out in the hall, and you guys can cover those. But otherwise, email him later on. Okay, with that said, let's talk about MIVEDA. And those of you watching online too, there's some important stuff here that may be different than what we've talked about recently. I've met with almost everyone, as far as I know, in the last couple weeks especially. I have like 30 meetings that we've had this week, so it's been crazy. But most of the stuff I've said has been accurate. We've had a couple little decisions that have changed things, and I'll talk about that in a sec. Residency points, again, just reviewing, we have 25% ownership by pre-qualified individuals in order to gain a residency point. And you can claim points for those individuals in up to 4 ways. If they live in the state, you get 1. If they live in the county, you get a point for that, but that also includes a state point. If they live in the city, that's a 3rd point. If you live in a general target area, that's a 4th possible point. There have been questions about what the general target area is. There's a map online in the Medical Marijuana Resources subpage that has this map. It also has a street directory. On the map, there's a general target area that's sort of this black outline of part of the city. The whole thing is a general target area. There are also little gray blotches within that map that are called specific target areas. Specific target areas are part of the general target area. So if someone lives in a specific target area, they also live in the general target area. The requirement for that MIVEDA point is that the resident that you're claiming that point with, again, who has 25% ownership of the company, can live within that general target area. If they live in the specific target area, they also live in the general. So just want to clarify that. And that is for one of the last 5 years. Local hiring, this is commitment to hire 15% or more of your workforce from residents. Micro LBE contracting, 24% or more of your contracts to city registered micro LBEs. And again, AJ Hills is your guy. 30 employees or more working 30 hours per week at that location. So there have been questions, is this across the company if I have 5 locations? No, it's per location. If you have a co-located facility where you have a grow, process, or provisioning, for example, that's all the same, that's all one licensed facility. You wouldn't have to have 90 employees in those 3 co-located facilities. It'd be one facility, so you'd have to have 30 employees at that facility to qualify for the point. And then there's that point for waivers. If your property does not require a waiver from the Planning Commission, you can claim that point. You need to guarantee, you need to check this anyway, but you need to guarantee that your property does not actually need that waiver, right? The map that we have online, we believe is pretty good. We recognize that there are some land uses that we might have missed. So your responsibility as an applicant is to make sure that your property is eligible and confirm whether or not it's going to need a waiver. If it does not need a waiver, if there's not a sensitive land use nearby, specifically a publicly owned park or playground, religious institution, or state licensed substance use disorder program. Those are the waivable separation distances. School, licensed child care center, or in the future, licensed medical marijuana facility, those are not waivable, but those other 3 are, and they're right down there. So you confirm, if you do not need a separation distance waiver, then you can take that point on the MIVEDA. Just a note about the waivers, your responsibility as an applicant is to notify that sensitive land use. Notify them, be able to demonstrate that you've notified them of your intent to apply and that you need a waiver of the separation distance. That's it, but just be able to demonstrate that you've done it. If you go to them and say, may I please have a waiver, that's fine. You know, you can get a letter from them saying, sure, but that's not gonna matter. The waiver is the Planning Commission's decision to make and only the Planning Commission's. So I just want to clarify that as well. Where that's been a question, if people have emailed and said, I talked to the church, they said, of course you can have a waiver. It's not the church's decision. They were then saying, okay, if the church has granted me a waiver, I don't need a waiver anymore, I can take the MIVEDA point. No, you are not eligible for that MIVEDA point if you need a separation distance waiver, granted or not by the Planning Commission. So, well, granted by the Planning Commission. If it's not granted by the Planning Commission, you will not be able to apply for special land use approval. So any questions on the MIVEDA points before we move on? Yes?
Back to the micro LBE,
yep.
It says 24% more of contracts. Like, does that include like supply? Or if you have a provisioning center?
Yep.
It doesn't seem like any of your product is going to come from a micro LBE because they can't meet
Correct.
the financial responsibility requirements.
Yep.
So are they included in the 100% or not? Or
it would be your total contracting. So yeah, we'll talk about the timing in a second and how you could potentially hit those numbers. Not all points in the MIVEDA are going to be accessible to all businesses. It's going to be hard. It may be quite hard to hit any or all of these points. Let me talk about that in a moment. Okay, as far as the commitments, these 3 especially, local hiring, micro LBE contracting, and 30 employees. These are a commitment for 3 years. Any point that you claim must be a commitment for 3 years. If you transfer your business to another party, they're going to be subject to the same commitments. Like any other condition of approval, they normally, like if you have a special land use approval and they say, you must keep your windows clear forever. Okay, then whoever you sell that property to and they continue that same use, they're going to be subject to the same conditions. A MIVEDA commitment is a condition of approval. Anyone you transfer the business to is subject to the same conditions at the same time frame. Failure to comply with the commitment or other violations of conditions of approval will result in action by the Planning Commission. So those could be severe actions. Just keep in mind, if you check that box, you're committing to having that, to keeping that commitment for 3 years. You must continue that. Question about MIVEDA points being claimed. They're claimed at the time of the application. So if you are claiming the residency point, for example, that resident that you're using to claim that point must be pre-qualified at the time of application. Excuse me. Except for pre-qualification. If the only thing that's different is pre-qualification, they're waiting to get pre-qualified on March 21st, for example, then you can include them. But if something else happens, if you add a resident to your ownership structure between the time of application and the draw, I can't give you that point. The only thing that can change is going to be pre-qualification, right? If someone's not pre-qualified at the time of application and becomes pre-qualified by the time of the draw, we can call it good. So in other words, if you have 7 out of 8 points, for example, on the MIVEDA at the time of application, and then something changes that would result in you getting 8 out of 8 points, I can't give you that 8th point. Make sense? Any questions on this? Going to refresh real quick to make sure we don't have any questions coming in. All right, as far as timing, here's a change. My initial reading, my reading of this residency point has been that your 5-year window changes. The 5-year window does not change. Let me repeat, the 5-year window does not change. It's going to be from the application date back 5 years. This is a big change from what I previously thought it was. I apologize. I thought I was clear on it. I wasn't. I now am. So what this means is that you're going to be looking back at your residence from the application date. Again, to get that point, you have to have a resident owning 25% of the company, pre-qualified, that's going to be living in whatever area it is that you're claiming a point for at the time of the application. They have to have lived in that area for 1 year, at least 1 year out of the last 5 years. No one said it was simple, right? Okay, but this is how you claim that residency point. Licensing monitoring takes place 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years after your licensing date. Okay, so at 1 year after licensing, we're going to monitor to make sure you're still meeting your MIVEDA commitments. What I thought it was that, okay, now that 5-year residency time frame is from that date back. That's not the case. 5 years is only from the application timeline date back 5 years. So you apply next Monday, we're looking at of March 4th, 2019, we're looking back to March 4th, 2014. And that resident, that pre-qualified resident owning 25% or more, has to have lived in that area for one of those last 5 years before March 24th, 2014 to March 24th. I can't get the dates. You guys understand what I'm saying? So fast forward 1.5 years up the road, or 2 years up the road, or whenever it is that we're doing our 1 year monitoring, the timeline is not 5 years back from that date. The timeline is 5 years back from the date of your application. This is a big change. We were worried about things like, oh no, what if my resident dies? What if I get a huge investment income and $5 million is invested in my company? How am I going to keep my 25% proportion? You don't need to worry about that now. All you're caring about is 5 years back from the date of the application. I'm trying to make this painfully clear. Is it painful yet? Okay. So, any questions about that? I don't see any questions on Facebook, so I'm going to keep going. As far as micro LBE, it's from your effective date. So your effective date of approval. You go to the Planning Commission for special land use approval, and unless there's an appeal, which there could be, but if there's not an appeal, 16 days after the decision, is the effective date of your approval. Of note is that that's when your buffer goes into effect too, right? So your effective date, you get approved on September 1st. That means your September 17th is your effective date, and that's when your buffer goes into effect. So we're going to look at your contracting from that date on. So that will include your build out. So that's where you could potentially meet that 24% a little more easily, because you could use local contractors for your build out. That's going to go up to the monitoring date 1 year after your licensing date. We'll look back from your effective date of approval to that monitoring date, and you show that you have 24% of your contracting from micro LBEs. It could be hard to hit that, because you'll also have to look another year down the road and another year down the road after that and show your contracting has been 24% or more to micro LBEs. So like I said, it might not be easy, but that's how you get the point.
So Landon,
Yes.
does any expenses incurred prior to the 16 days after the decision are not considered in that calculation?
Correct.
Right.
The question for those listening online was that before the effective date you've incurred some expenses, could those be counted towards? No. It's your effective date onwards. I hope it's still doable, right? But that's up to you and your clients to determine whether or not you can go ahead with it. As far as hiring, so that's the 30 employees at 30 hours a week or more, or the 15% of your workforce from Grand Rapids residency. That's at the time of. I thought it was a year, and looking back a year, looking back 2 years, looking back 3 years. No, it's a snapshot at the time of monitoring. So we understand that you'll have to have a build-up, ramping up your business in the first year as you start up and get going. You need 30 employees. At the second year of monitoring, we're going to look and see, it's going to be tax records, so it's going to be pretty hard to game it, but I recognize there could be ways to do it. You have to show that you have 30 employees at the time of monitoring that have been working 30 hours a week, and that's based on your tax records. So it will not do you any good to say, hey, for this week and this week only, we have 30 employees at 30 hours a week, because that won't be reflected in your tax records. Along those lines, everyone here, I've met you guys for the most part. I think you guys are fine people. I'm not worried about you lying, but those people on Facebook, I don't know you. So if you lie on your MIVEDA trying to get a point, number one, you're going to have to show down the road that you can meet these commitments. And if you're lying in your application, you're lying in your MIVEDA, like I said, there are ramifications, right? So, and that can include loss of rights, yeah.
And it came up in an earlier workshop. Somebody asked a question about the 30 employees.
Yep.
Was that at a singular location?
That is at a singular location.
Singular location.
Yep.
Within the city limits of Grand Rapids.
The 30 employees at 30 hours a week is per location, not per company. And they have to be working at the location. We've had questions, can a regional manager apply? Not really. They're going to be working somewhere else and coming and visiting. It's 30 employees, 30 hours a week at the location. Any more questions on that? The waiver is pretty straightforward. Once you don't need a waiver, you can take the point, and that is not going to change. So if you can take the point at the start, you're good. Something has happened. Okay, there we go. Application process. We have two methods of applying. You can do online application. This is live now. Has anyone checked it out? We have several applications that are currently have already been started on that, so we know it's working. The difference between, there's a special land use application and there's a supplemental application, and both are essentially included in the online application. I would suggest taking that supplemental application especially and putting it next to your computer as you're putting together your application to make sure you get all those boxes checked, right? But it's all one application. If you answer all the questions on the online application and add all your attachments, you'll be good. If you are turning in paper, you need to include the special land use application and the supplemental application and all the attachments as well. I want to keep talking about online real quick. Once it's submitted, just note, you can go in now, you can start the online application, you can save it and come back to it, but once you actually submit, that's your application. You can't go back into your application online and change things. That said, we expect changes to happen. We expect as we move through this process, you're going to be tweaking your plans, if I notice that you'll have little issues with your application and say I need you to correct this, that's fine. We expect that. You'll be emailing things to me, but you won't be able to go back online into your application to fix those. If you have a written paper, a written document, you would need to scan that and upload it. If you have things that you've been creating online, just drop the digital file and make it a PDF for attachments. You can pay online with a credit card. If you don't want to pay with a credit card, you can defer the payment. We'll talk about this in more detail. So those are your options for online. Some people have had questions for online or for paper. These are going to be entered into a system, a permitting system, with some information available for public consumption. Your attachments will not be visible. So I know there's some security issues, some concerns about what will be visible to the public or competitors. The attachments won't be. The other information that you enter will be. But we don't have questions that will be visible that would be potentially security threats. As far as your paper applications, there are two applications, special land use and the supplemental application checklist. The supplemental application, you actually have a question where you're saying, here's what kind of facility I have, and that's about all you're writing on that application, just checking off the boxes. So it's mostly a checklist, but you want to submit both of them and all attachments. The special land use application has a page in it that has this detailed checklist. That's really meant for new builds. There's been a question about how many of these plans do I need? You want your plans to be as complete as possible, but in specific, there is a drainage plan, a utility plan. You don't need to turn those in at this point. Those will be important during permitting. So let's get you to the Planning Commission, get through the approval process, and then we'll go back and get those plans done by the time we actually get into permitting. Some of you have already expended the resources on that plan. Include it. That's great. That's important, especially if you are making site changes, like significant site changes that will affect drainage and utilities. It would probably be a good idea to include those. If you are simply reusing an existing building, it probably wouldn't make sense to do so. The special land use application also says to include 2 11x17 copies and digital files. I don't want 2 copies of paper. I expect these applications to be somewhat substantial. Let's save some trees. Submit 1 paper copy and that digital. You can do it on CD, you can do it on a flash drive. I wouldn't suggest making a Dropbox or trying to email it to me. That's not going to go well. So actually have a physical digital. You know what I mean, right? CD, drive, however you get it to me, but you should be able to get it to me physically with your paper copy if you do so online. And then you'd submit and pay in person at the development center, which is north of here. Most of you have met with me now. 1120 Monroe. That's where you can submit. I want to stop for 1 second and notice Facebook questions. What will happen if we can't maintain the micro LBE VEDA point? Most of the registered businesses are construction-based. And also, so 25% ownership for MIVEDA must have lived in general target area for 1 of the 5 years prior to application date. So just going back to this MIVEDA monitoring timeline. Sorry for the delay there on Facebook. So yes, if you can't maintain any of these VEDA points, MIVEDA points, you'll have problems. We'll have to go back to the Planning Commission, and you need to be able to maintain all commitments for 3 years after your licensing date. As far as 25% ownership, must have lived in general target area for 1 of 5 years prior to application date. Yes. If it's general target area and you're claiming the 4 points for someone living in general target area, yes, that 5-year timeline again is from your application date back 5 years. 1 of those 5 years. I think I covered this. I don't know where that comment came in, so I just want to make sure we're covering that again. Okay. So any questions about the yes, sir.
And then I just wanted to add in regards to the micro-local piece. If over the timeline, say some of their different business needs aren't currently provided in our directory, we are always accepting new micro-locals. So
good point.
If you have any companies that you think might fit or you don't have a clue, send them to me and I can work on seeing if they're eligible for our program, but we will continue to accept new micro-locals as we move forward.
Okay, so again, this is AJ Hills, and for those on Facebook, the Micro LBE coordinator. saying that the micro LBE list will be changing.
Yeah.
Continue to add businesses that meet those certain requirements.
Any client or practitioner wonders if a tax company or if a technology company meets our standards, please send them out.
Yep. So if there's a question about whether someone would meet those standards, contact AJ, and let's see if we can qualify them as a micro LBE. I know, for example, there were some people interested in making this possible secure transport business micro LBE. This could be difficult because there's a very sort of narrow gap between the minimum capitalization requirement of the state and the maximum ceiling to qualify as a micro. So that might be possible. That could be a way to hit contracting if you're going to be contracting with a secure transporter, which you'll have to. So that's a possibility, but they need to get registered with AJ. If there's a question about can the contractor that I like and want to work with be a micro LBE, they should contact AJ Hills. Okay, I'm going to move on unless there are more questions. All right, the process. To be included in the draw, you have to submit a complete application, including the fee, between 8 a.m. next Monday, March 4th, 2019, Eastern Standard Time, yes, 8 o'clock, minutes, second 0, right? And 4 o'clock, 4000 p.m., daylight savings, Friday, March 15th, 2019. So that's the window. We got to put a hard cutoff somewhere. That's to be included in the draw. Yes, we'll timestamp, and we'll open that submit button so you can actually submit starting at 8 a.m. next Monday the 4th. The online app has been tested. It's a Acela program, which is the same program that the state uses. We understand that a bunch of applications that now and then have been thrown at this app, at the online app, and it can crash the system. So to avoid that possibility, we've tested it, it's working. Don't wait until the last minute. If you have a technology problem, that's sort of on you. We've done what we can. The other reason not to wait until the last minute is that we're going by our clock. We'll accept your applications. That submit button's not going to close. But if it shows up at 4:01 p.m., you click it and go, yes, it got accepted. That just means it got accepted. It doesn't mean that you're going to be in the draw because it came in after that hard cutoff. So just keeping that in mind. Wait until the last day, might happen. Wait until the last hour, probably not advisable. Last minute, bad idea. Okay? Deficiencies. The advantage to applying early is that I can give you more time to correct deficiencies. If you apply late, I will not be able to review your application probably during that window. We'll review as soon as we can, and generally in the order in which they're received. If there's a deficiency and we receive your application towards the end, whenever we get to review it, we can give you 2 business days to correct a deficiency. And that clock will start the moment I hit send, right? So make sure that email address that's in your application is working, you keep grcity.us, or grand-rapids.mi.us. Make sure that our email addresses don't go to your spam, because you want to make sure that you get that email from me or Angelica. So we will be able to give you 2 business days from the time we send the email to correct the deficiency. If it's not corrected by that time, we're going to have to reject your application. I don't want to do that, so just make sure, number 1, make sure your application is complete when you submit. But number 2, make sure you're watching your email so in case we have to, we can tell you. Fees. The fee is due at the time of the application. At one point we had talked about maybe we can just do the land use fee, which is 2015 for a special land use. No, we have to do $5,000, which is the fee. That's per license. So if you have 1 license for your facility, it's a standalone whatever, provisioning center in this case, for my example, that's $5,000. If you're co-locating or stacking, you're going to have multiple license in the same application. You have to pay $5,000 per license. So that will be due at the time of the application. Payments, I mentioned, online applications is credit card or you can defer. If you defer it, you got to get into the development center to pay it. We have to receive payment again within 2 business days. You go to the development center. Credit cards are good at the development center. Checks, you can make them out to the city of Grand Rapids. If you want to pay in cash, I'd appreciate a phone call. Let me know, number 1. But also, what we'll do is we'll give you an invoice to check, yes, we see your application, or either we've just received it, or yes, we see it online. We'll give you an invoice based on that. You take your cash payment. Don't bring it inside. say, hey, I'm here I want to pay, but my cash is in the car, or wherever. We give you an invoice. You take it down here to City Hall and pay the treasurer's office if you want to pay cash. If you want to pay any other way, credit card online, credit card in person, or check, money order, whatever, that can go to the development center. But a cash payment goes to the treasurer's office after you stop at the development center and get an invoice. Refunds. For core industry applications that are submitted in the next 2 weeks, right, to get into the draw, if you withdraw your application for whatever reason before the draw happens, we can give you 60% back. So that's $5,000 or more, right? So we'll give you some, but we can't give you all. If we get to the draw and you get an order, but we haven't sent the public hearing notice out yet for your case, and you withdraw for whatever reason, let's say someone nearby gets approved and you're going to get buffered out. You can withdraw. We can give you a 20% refund. So it's not much, but it's something. And then after the notice is published, mailed out, we would not be able to give you a refund at all. So when you're getting close to your planning commission date, no refund. If you're a core industry application, again, so a special land use, and you withdraw, and you're not in the draw, so you don't get in the next couple weeks, we can give you a 50% refund if you withdraw before we send out the public hearing notice. But for the people here today, I know we're talking about applications in the next couple weeks, so look at the top section here. After this time, it'll be 50% before the notice, and then 0 after. And then for those who are interested in support industry applications, being safety compliance or secure transport, we can give you a half back if you withdraw within 1 week of filing your application and prior to final action being taken, which would be us writing a resolution to approve. So any questions on fees, payments, or refunds before we move on? Okay. Just so you know, our timeline for reviews and what we're going to be doing basically as staff is for this first round window, next couple of weeks, we'll be receiving applications and reviewing them for completeness. We want to get your application into the draw and understand that it's complete. So what you'll see online is that it's moved into in review. And there will be an automatic email that goes out to you when that changes. So you'll know when we've essentially accepted it, said, yes, we believe it's complete. Good. So we'll move on. So we're going to try to do that in the next couple of weeks. Depending on how many applications we get, we don't know what we're to expect. So if we get just a handful, we'll be able to get to those in the next 2 weeks. If we don't, it could be longer than 2 weeks before we can actually review. So I've talked about how we identify if you have deficiencies or not. After the window and before the draw, our main focus will be, finishing up those reviewing for completeness, but also verifying the MIVEDA points. If you claim a certain number of points, we have to verify each one of those points, except for those 3 commitments. If you check the box, we're just going to assume you're okay. You'll have to deal with it a year down the road and monitoring if you can't meet that commitment. But we'll be reviewing your 4 residency points and your waiver point if you claim those. And if you say I get 7 and I come back and say 6, we can fight it out. But we're going to fight it out and then come to a conclusion in order for the draw. So you guys understand what the MIVEDA means as far as your draw order. That's what we'll be doing at that point up until the draw, is just confirming those MIVEDA points and doing what we can to make sure that we're all on the same page. After the draw, we have a queue. We'll generally be saying, okay, now we know who's going to go to Planning Commission when, kind of. I'll get into the queue and all that consideration order in a few minutes. So we'll be doing more of a land use review, helping you get prepared for the Planning Commission hearing. And then let's say you get approved, and I hope you do. Then we go to permanent construction. That's when we do a detailed code review, when we really get into all the finer details of your plan and code review for permanent construction. So you need to do your build out, get your license, and go. So any questions about that timeline? Okay. The draw. As we all know, it does not confer land use rights. It's just the order of consideration by the Planning Commission. We currently have it scheduled for Friday, April 12th, 2 p.m., right in this room. We'll live stream that. Your MIVEDA points. I know I said at the last meeting it would be 9 points. I was wrong. It's 8 points possible from MIVEDA. We'll first get the bucket of applications that are complete and have 8 out of 8 MIVEDA points that are verified. We'll draw from those randomly. Then we'll move on to those that have 7 out of 8 verified MIVEDA points, 6 out of 8, 5 out of 8, et cetera, down to 0. So every application that's entered into the draw will get drawn. We'll end up with this long possible queue, and that will compress over time as applications are withdrawn or buffered out. So any questions about the draw? I'm not going to tell you who's actually doing the drawing. You'll find out the day of. So don't try to contact them and bribe them. Yeah.
So the folks that get 8 out of 8 points is that group draw first and then 7 out of 8 and then 6 out of 8?
Correct. So the group, 8 out of 8 MIVEDA points, if we get any, right, we will draw from those first at random. Then we'll move on to the 7 out of 8, draw from those at random, and so on. I've had a lot of questions about influence areas. Really, their influence area is that we know that there are areas in which your facility type or your application can affect another application because of the separation distance requirement, either directly or indirectly. So we could have conflicts. So the influence area basically just means that we can consider, the Planning Commission can consider one application per influence area at a time. So you will not be on the same meeting as somebody in the same influence area because the result of your application could affect them either indirectly or directly. And what I mean by this, so there are 21 areas and they're all lettered on this map. Don't worry about what the letters mean. They don't have anything to do with order. If you're in influence area B and you're drawn ahead of another application that's influence area A, we'll take your application to the Planning Commission first. A does not go before B. The order of the draw affects the order, and that's it. The influence area letters are random. But what this means when I say directly or indirectly is that I have this picture of, the first one to be drawn, the second one to be drawn, and the fourth one to be drawn. They're all in the same influence area. So you can see those circles that represent the separation distance. It doesn't matter if it's 1,000 or 2,000 feet, but you can see that they overlap each other. One in that, I don't know what color these are, I'm sorry, I'm colorblind. But one is more than 2,000 feet or more, is outside of the separation distance of 4. And 4 is outside of 1, right? So they don't directly impact each other, but 2 impacts both of them. Because you can see that both 1 and 4 are within the separation distance of 2. So whatever happens to 1 might, if 1 gets approved, 2's out of the game. If 1 doesn't get approved and gets denied, 2's still in the game. So if 1 gets approved, 2's out, 4 is in good shape. So that's how 1 and 4 are indirectly impacting each other. So how does this, yes?
That graph doesn't seem to be consistent with what I understood you to say, because 1 and 4 look like they overlap in that drawing, so that was kind of hypothetical.
So you're saying it doesn't seem consistent with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The circles, the 2,000-foot separation can overlap, as long as it doesn't overlap the actual property.
Oh, I see.
So
Yes,
so
you're
1,
right.
2, and
Okay,
4.
I got it.
I just didn't put parcel lines around it.
Got it. Okay, I get it. Thanks.
So how this plays out, let's just go through a quick scenario. Let's say we have 10 applications. Actually, I'm not really going to go through this scenario in too much detail. This is a handout. This is going to be available. You can work. It's a logic puzzle. And this is a logic puzzle that me and Angelica are going to have to work through, right? But you got to draw order. It's one certain order, 1 through 10. You got to draw a result where it randomizes that number. Then we apply this filter of influence areas. And so then we say, okay, meeting 1 is going to have these applications. Meeting 2 will have this. So we're changing the order basically. What this means is you can see draw result. Let's look at the first 3. 2, then 3, then 1. Okay, so then we look down. Well, suddenly 1 has moved ahead of 3, even though it was drawn after 3. This is really confusing. I have the easy button on because, yeah, it's not easy, right? I just wish I could press it. So we're putting 2 and 1 together because they're in different influence areas. 2 and 3 are both in influence area B in this scenario, so we can't consider them the same meeting. That's where we're pushing number 3, which is also in B, back to the second meeting. So then what happens is that we have this, look at meetings 1 and 2 at the bottom. Say, hey, 2 and 3 got approved. The second meeting, one got approved, 5 got denied. So what happened to 4, 10, and 6? You know, you can see that something happened. So suddenly 4, 10, and 6 are out of the game for whatever reason. So now 8 and 7, which were way back originally, get moved up. And I would put 9 up as well, except 9 happens to be in the same influence area as 7, so we can't have it in the same meeting. So those little dots, we'd find somebody else that's not in this immediate scenario and pull them up and put them in that third meeting. So the whole point of this is that leaving the day of the draw, you'll have a general idea of where you are in the order, but it's only general. As things happen, we'll probably get you moved up a little bit as applications are buffered out or withdrawn. But it's just going to give you a general idea, and that's all we can do. So you're just going to have to trust us. You can always call us and say, hey, I thought I was going to be on in July, and now I'm suddenly on in June, and oh no, I just got moved. And we'll explain it to you. And I'll just write this out and say, here you go, this is how we did it. You know, and then you can figure it out. So any questions on that process? Noticing that there was a question that came in on Facebook, so I want to address that real quick. And I just refreshed, and I can't read it. Okay, it's coming back. I'm going to go back to it as soon as it reloads. Okay, so the timeline for consideration.
And I know
Yes.
you don't want to cover all that too much, but can you go back real quick?
Yep.
When you say 4 and 10 are out, that's because they were buffered out.
Yeah, so in this situation,
Okay.
just for the scenario, I say 2, 4, and 10 are all within 300 feet of each other.
Okay.
So 2 got approved in that first meeting,
Right.
therefore 4 and 10 are screwed.
Right. Yeah.
Are buffered out. So your question was, the question to the guys on Facebook is, what happened to 4 and 10? Why did they get denied or buffered out? Because they're close to 2
Yeah.
in this scenario.
Okay, gotcha.
Here's a question on Facebook. What would happen if we started the app with 3 Class Cs in a fully integrated facility and wanted to bump it to 5 Class C licenses down the road after approval? Okay, so that's a great question. You've gotten approved, you've gotten your land use rights for some use, and you want to change that use, that marijuana, by, in this case, adding a couple more Class C licenses. So at your application time, in this case, we got 3 Class Cs, so your fee at the time of application is going to be $15,000, plus if you have your provisioning center, whatever it might be. And you get approved, and your land use rights then apply, and then you have your separation distance and you're safe within 1,000 feet. And then down the road you say, I want to have 2 more Class C licenses stacked into this grow facility. Then you just go back to the Planning Commission because you're expanding your special land use. But you don't have to do this game of buffer and concern about separation distances. You're just going back to the Planning Commission saying, we're expanding this special land use, maybe please have these extra 2. And they would have a public hearing. Your fee would be based on the number of licenses you're expanding by, so another 10 grand. In this case, because you're adding 2 Class C stacked licenses. And then you go back to the Planning Commission, they have a public hearing and make a decision. Make sense? So you can change things down the road as long as your property is still eligible, right? Down the road, what you could do too is, no, I'm not even gonna get into that. Basically, we just have, yes, you can change your special land use approval around, but if you're increasing the intensity somehow, expansion, a new or expanded special land use requires special land use approval by the Planning Commission. Okay, timeline for consideration. We have a policy where we are, depending on the number of cases on the agenda, we can reserve at least up to 3 Planning Commission slots for non-marijuana applications. We have development happening in the city, and we can't put it all on hold because of marijuana applications. We expect our first Planning Commission cases on May 9th, 2019. And then we'll fit more in as we can. We typically have 2 meetings per month all year except for in November and December because of the holidays. So our intent is we'll probably consider fewer cases at the start just because it's a new industry and new applications. We expect more neighbors to be interested, more people to be interested, probably longer public hearings, more media coverage. So we'll probably, I don't know how many we're going to have on the Planning Commission agenda, but assume fewer. And then over time, as we get more used to it and the hubbub starts dying down, we can hopefully pick up more cases and try to get these processed faster. So any questions on that? Okay. As far as finding out other applications, I mentioned in my email last week that we'll have a table of information on the website and also on the map. What this might look like is that here's an address, and by the way, all these addresses are not suitable. The first two are the Development Center and City Hall, right? And then we just have residential properties otherwise. So those aren't suitable. Let's say we have an application that comes in. Here's the address, here's the type. This is what the separation distance would be. And for a provisioning center, I know it's weird. You have two separation distances, 1,000 feet away from, in this case, a processor, and then 2,000 feet from another provisioning center, as long as it's also commercially zoned. So provisioning centers will probably have both of those. The influence area is located in. When we actually get the queue, we'll put the order in there. What's the status? So actually, the first one, these first two, where it says open and in review, if it's opened, that means it's not been reviewed yet for completeness, so it shouldn't actually have the queue order on there. I shouldn't have written that. But it will just say it's opened. The second situation, we're showing that is also provisioning center. It's an influence area W. It was 8th picked, and it's in review. That means that I have reviewed it for completeness, anywhere from the point of being reviewed for completeness all the way to the point of being scheduled for a planning commission hearing. So it'll be in review for a long time. Many of these applications that will be the status. 200 Lion, in this case, I'm showing that it has 3 Class C grow licenses proposed and a processor and a provisioning center. It's an influence area V, and it was a 20th picked. And it has been scheduled for a planning commission hearing for the 11th of July. Again, these are total examples, right? So this is the kind of information that you can see, that you'll be able to see. And this should be popping up as soon as applications are submitted, not as soon as they're reviewed. So as something is opened online, as it's submitted, there will be some information that will show up online. As far as the status and stuff, the change of status will be up to me to do, or Angelica. But you'll be able to get a decent amount of information just by looking at the website. We'll also put it up on the map. This is a hard one to see. The map will probably be color-coded. In this case, I'm showing a completely unsuitable property. It's in the middle of downtown, but it has this weird little wedge shape, right? So right at the center, the property would be highlighted, the parcel, and we're also hoping to put an icon in on that corresponds to what the state shows on their map of licensed facilities. So, and then we'll show, in this case, this is a provisioning center, so I have a 1,000-foot buffer around it and a 2,000-foot buffer around it. And those lines will be dashed, maybe not like this, and it'll probably be in a different color. But I couldn't see anything when I was doing this map as a dummy, right? So I made it white. So it'll probably be color-coded. It'll probably be a different kind of dash. Those lines will only become solid once the buffer goes into effect. So upon an effective date of approval, whenever that is. So, and then you'll be able to see, oh yeah, that application has been submitted. That's what will go on the map. And then it will continue to be on there until somehow it's withdrawn or denied. Once it's approved, then the lines become solid. Probably color-coded based on the type of facility, as well as having an icon. So we'll have some information. It's going to be a very busy map for a while, but you'll be able to see it visually on this system as well. This is going to be on the marijuana map that we have online right now. Any questions about what's going to be online, either on a table or on the map? Okay. Just a couple events of interest. We've had some people asking us about these different items that you might care about: energy efficiency and accessibility. Want to let you know that there's an energy efficiency workshop coming up, hosted by the West Michigan chapter of the USGBC, the U.S. Green Building Council. That's on March 13th. City Flats Hotel downtown. It's free. And also there's an accessibility workshop talking about universal design. That's on the 18th of April. In the morning it costs $25 to $50, depending if you're getting lunch. That's at Embassy Suites, just up the street here on Monroe. So I just want to let you guys know about those. There has been interest in these two topics in particular. I've gotten a lot of questions about energy efficiency from growers, just as an example. Question came in on Facebook: will this recording be available to the public after the meeting? Yes, it will. This is on YouTube being recorded live right now, and then the video team is awesome, and they're going to turn this thing around and hopefully have it recorded and ready to go. And as soon they'll be on YouTube, and as soon as I can post it on the website, I'll do that as well. Okay, so thank you and good luck. What questions? What have I not covered? What questions does anyone here have? I'll keep refreshing on the tablet as well. Yes.
The website has some links to as it relates to the Good Neighbor Plan.
Yep.
Is there a little more detail to try and narrow down who you need to talk to in terms of either business associations and/or neighborhood associations
Good
based
question.
on your address?
Yep. So the question is, Good Neighbor Plan. Who do you need to talk to? Let's go through your website. So, number one, the Good Neighbor Plan needs to be, you need to start the Good Neighbor Plan ASAP. You need to have the Good Neighbor Plan in process with a meeting. You have to have had a meeting by the time you apply. And I see a couple more, no, those are old questions. By the time you apply, you have to have talked to the neighborhood association, if there is one, have had a public meeting, and have something in process for the Good Neighbor Plan. How to find those people. Contacts. So we say, okay, here's the neighborhoods. We have a template for the Good Neighbor Plan. There's the ordinance section and a neighborhood association map. Click on that and you say, okay, I know that my site is here on West Leonard. For what it's worth, there are not any in this particular area of town.
Yes, there is.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
It's unfunded, but there is one.
I'm sorry, there is a neighborhood association. There aren't any suitable properties, I should say,
Okay.
in West Side Connection. So I'm just throwing this out there as an example of where you could look. And you say, okay, I see that my contact is Barbara Sudamore and her email address is this. Let me just check the map to make sure. Oh yeah, that's where my site is. So you go and contact her, and if you can't get in touch with anyone, you contact me and say, I can't get in touch with anyone. But you want to get in touch with someone ASAP. Now the Good Neighbor Plan needs to be in process. It doesn't need to be finished. The Good Neighbor Plan itself, you need to have a meeting. The sort of community engagement requirement at this point is that you've met with somebody, you've met with me, and that something is happening as far as this Good Neighbor Plan goes. So you would write, hey, this is my address, this is what type of facility I want to have. If you're a grower, what class, or how many classes, your name, your signature, your date. The neighborhood organization, if there is one, will type out, yes, this is our organization, here's who I am and my title, and sign and date saying, something's happened here. Yes, we've engaged, and there are some things that we haven't resolved yet, and that's okay, but we need to have some level of engagement before applying. So that's why I say, like, you leave here at 3 o'clock today, 3:01, you call your neighborhood association, make sure that something gets going if you haven't done so already. The neighborhood association, though, doesn't need to, again, this does not need to be complete. We just have to have something done. The Good Neighbor Plan will need to be completed by the time of your Planning Commission consideration. And I actually want to go back real quick and talk about a couple of those things in the applications along those lines. This is not it. Okay. So Good Neighbor Plan, you need to have had meetings. You need to have signature. If there's not a recognized neighborhood organization, you do your best. Let's go back to here real quick. Statement of good faith effort. If you can't complete number 2A, which is the neighborhood association representative signing off, you say, I'm trying. I tried to contact the neighborhood organization. If there's not one, there's no recognized neighborhood association for this area. So instead, I sent an email out, or a postcard by mail on this date, and I attach a copy of the mailing and the list. And I also hosted a neighborhood meeting at this date and time and location, and include a sign-in sheet. So you need to have some engagement. If there's a business association or quarter improvement district or some other group that you contacted and talked to, list it here too. You You don't have to, but you need to have some level of engagement in order to apply. And then you go through and start listing out how you're going to meet all these requirements and be a good neighbor. Yeah.
Does the GMP need to be signed by the time of the application?
The GMP needs to be signed. The neighbors, if you turn something in and you've been doing work and you can prove it, there's no reason for a neighborhood organization representative not to sign this. Yes, you've done something. That's all they're saying is that, yes, it's in process. But we talk to these folks on these occasions, and there's still work to be done. So they're essentially agreeing with you. If they're not going to sign it, I'll probably call them up and be like, hey, what's going on? Is there some extenuating circumstance here? That is the reason you're not signing this. But if you've been doing some engagement, even if it's just a meeting and that's it, and you say, yeah, I know I need to still go out and do more. I know we have to do all this good neighbor plan still. And they'll say, yeah, we need to do a whole plan. But there's been some engagement. I'll sign it, and that's all they're saying. So before I move on with the good neighbor plan to some other points, any more questions about the good neighbor plan? But get in touch with the neighborhoods as soon as you can. Try to find those guys. If there's no neighborhood association, you can contact me and say, hey, can I have a mailing list, please? I can't guarantee I'll be able to turn around in any kind of fast fashion. I've been able to, but we also haven't been in the middle of application review. So I can't guarantee how much time we'll have to actually make those applications for it. Or those mailing lists, excuse me. Okay, so good neighbor plan. That needs to be in process, but complete by the time you get to the planning commission. Same thing with the SEPTED plan. The police, if you haven't talked to the police yet about a SEPTED plan, call them at 302, right after you talk to the neighborhood association, because you want to get, they're typically going to require that you have an in-person meeting at the site to look at the site and say, okay, we're going to need to do this for our SEPTED plan. SEPTED being crime prevention through environmental design. So that typically, like I said, requires an in-person meeting. There are several officers working on these, but they need to be able to schedule you, and you have to have them sign off on a document as well in order to apply. They can sign off saying it's in progress, very similar to the good neighbor plan. We're working on it. I'm deferring everything to them as far as what is needed for that SEPTED plan. So talk to them now if you haven't already. Make sure you have something scheduled if you haven't already met with them, and get them to sign off a statement saying, we're working on it. We have some work to do still. That's okay. They just need to have, you just need to have it finished. And it's a plan. So it's a plan for SEPTED by the time you go to the planning commission. I want to mention the facility plan and the proof of insurance. I'm sorry I didn't cover this earlier. I mentioned this in my email, I think last week. Facility plan required by Laura, and according to Laura's specs, which is outlined in the rules, we're not requiring this for your application. We were going to. It makes more sense to wait until you get through the planning commission process and you're going for your certificate of occupancy. We'll require it at that time. But no need to prepare that document, which you'd only turn into Laura at the end of the process anyway. So you don't need to submit the facility plan at the time of the application here. You just need it before we finish our process locally. And proof of insurance, it doesn't make sense to get a policy of insurance if you may not be able to use the property. So you need a letter of intent from the insurance agency meeting the requirements of the ordinance. I think it's 1 million per occurrence and 2 million aggregate. It's all in there. It's in the supplemental checklist. Just make sure that the policy, the letter of intent that you're showing with your application is accurate to the requirements current, so that you can say, yes, we will have this policy if approved.
Landon?
Yep.
The letter of intent signed by the insurance agent?
Yep. And that can take them a while to turn around sometime. Anything that you have to count on somebody else to do for you, get it going now, because you don't want to get stuck waiting for somebody to sign something and you're like, you're my last piece of the puzzle here. What's going on? And then they get hit by a truck, right? So don't let that happen. Along those lines, I also want to talk about, we're talking about attachments. Did that cover your question?
I guess what's the wording of it? I mean, that they intend to issue a policy if they're paid for it? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
We will issue a policy meeting these requirements, lay it out if approved. Just want to talk about, I've had questions about the statement of consent, notarized. I am buying the property, am I the owner, or do I need to have the buyer or the seller sign this? No, if you're buying the property, for all intents and purposes, you're the owner. You sign the statement of consent and get it notarized. But you'd also need to give us a copy of your purchase agreement or option or a contract or whatever it is, so that we know you're actually going to be the owner. We'll keep that confidential as much as we can. So the statement of consent is yours to sign if you're going to be the owner. If you're leasing, have the owner sign it. Large documents, pre-qualification, again, we'll let you need to be pre-qualified. I understand that the governor signed an executive order this morning disbanding the MMLB. Just want to say that's if that happens, that's 60 days to take effect. We think that that would take effect after this process. We don't know how that's going to go. It could get overturned, but we know that that was news. So you should go forward assuming that you're still going to need to get pre-qualified by the MMLB and it won't be an administrative process. So yes, pre-qualification is required except in the case where you have a reasonable expectation to be pre-qualified, not at the time of your application, but at the time of the draw, by the time of the draw. Facility plan covered, security plan is required. Documentation of separation distances. People say, how do I do that? Just tell me how you found the distance. Show a map. Here's my parcel. Here's 1,000 feet around the parcel. Here's how I measured it. Here's how I identified what sensitive uses are around it. Here's how I can prove that I notified the sensitive uses that are within that 1,000 feet that can be waived for the separation distance. So if it's Google Maps, fine, whatever. You can use a marijuana map. If it's close, and by close I mean probably like 50 to 100 feet, if there's any kind of question, and this isn't just to demonstrate to me, but also to competitors who are going to question your application. If it's close, you might want to get a survey to say, okay, I'm not sure. I'm aware of applicants who have been down to inches, to try to find out if the property is eligible. Remember, it's up to you to prove that your property is eligible. We think we're pretty good with the map, but it's up to you ultimately. Proof of insurance we covered. Elevation, site plan, sign plan, lighting plan, operations and management plan. Essentially what you have here is that the Planning Commission is pretty good at reading plans, but they're not development professionals. All these plans that you have, you also have the operations and management plan sitting next door or next to them, the nature of proposed use that's shown in your SLU plan or application, the site and building layout that's required as part of the SLU application. Those are describing what you have in the plans, right? So you should be able to say, if I'm reading the plan, I go, I wonder what that is. Let me read this operations and management plan or this nature of proposed use or site and building layout. Oh, now I understand, right? So really describe what's in the plan so that people can read it if they're not necessarily professionals. You don't want the Planning Commission to have questions about anything. You want it to be clear in describing what you have in the plans. Site plan is required if you're doing any site work. If you are not doing any site work, you can submit a current survey as long as it accurately reflects what's on the ground. So if nothing's changed on that site and the survey's 10 years old, that's still fine as long as it actually shows what's there today. With the building elevations, if you're not changing anything at all with a building, you can just take nice pictures. If there's any change proposed to that building, you'd want to plan for that, right? So maybe you're not doing anything except for the front of the building. Have a plan for the front of the building showing exactly what changes you're proposing. For the sides, you could just take pictures. An architect might not really matter or save you that much money if you're just doing elevations for one side. But we'll accept pictures as long as nothing's changing for those sides. People have asked about sign plan and lighting plan. These don't need to be super detailed. You just need to show, I am intending to put in signs here and here and here. Here's a sign on the building right now. I would like to reface that sign. The sign is 32 square feet or whatever it is. Just call that out so we have an idea of what you're proposing. Same thing with lighting plan. I don't need photometrics. I don't need the lumen measurements on the ground, whatever it might be. The idea is to show us what the lighting impact is going to be. So you might identify what lighting fixtures are out there right now or what you're going to add and when they're going to be running. If you know how bright they're going to be, that's great. I don't need the specs of what exactly kind of fixture. One thing that would be very useful is if you're a grower and you're going to have a grow room or all these interior lights, it'd be very useful for us to know how many lights are you proposing inside and out. That'd be great. We'd love to know what your lighting plan is inside. if you have it available, just so we have an idea, particularly as far as energy. As far as the operations and management plan, like I mentioned, the nature of proposed use from the special land use application and the site and building layout are going to have a lot of similarities, potentially redundancy, to the operations and management plan. Be redundant. The idea is to describe what you're seeing on plans and be able to describe the use that you're proposing and all the aspects of it so that you can minimize the number of questions at the Planning Commission. And that goes for the public. If people have questions, it'd be great if I can look at your plan and say, oh yeah, this is what they're saying, as long as it's not sensitive information. Oh, that can really clear things up a lot in advance of the public hearing, because what you don't want to do is not have enough information and then get blindsided by people freaking out at your public hearing and have the Planning Commission not necessarily jeopardize your application, but at least delay it. Septic plan, MIVEDA, good neighbor plan, I think we covered those. I think that's it. Any more questions? Any more? Yes.
The LARA pre-qualification. Now,
Yes.
Prior to the draw, that has to be, you have to be pre-qualified. Is that right?
Yes. Question for those online, you have to be pre-qualified prior to the draw. The draw, not the application date, but only this once. For applications coming in that won't be going to the draw, you need to be pre-qualified. If an application shows up at 4:02 p.m. on Friday, it was intended to be in the draw, but it's not going to be in there, then we'd probably do the same thing and say, okay, you're going to get pre-qualified by when the draw would have been. We'll call it good, but pre-qualification is required, and that's a pre-qualified entity, and any residents that you want to use for the MIVEDA point have to be pre-qualified as well. Yep.
For the pre-qualification, so you're looking for pre-qualification of the entity or the location as well?
The pre-qualification of the entity. I know that the state says we're pre-qualifying certain locations based on the capitalization. I don't care. You can be a pre-qualified entity and apply for multiple locations as long as you can actually, I don't really care how many locations the state has pre-qualified you for, is my point. Question coming in online. Will any local resident that obtains a pre-qual after March 15th get the residency points given that they have been a local resident for over a year? For example, to get pre-qualified on March 21st. I think I understand that correctly. So yeah, the pre-qualification requirement, again, as long as you're pre-qualified and any resident that you're trying to use for MIVEDA point is pre-qualified, that you need to be pre-qualified by the time of the draw. If you think there's a question, if I'm looking at your completeness, reviewing for completeness, and I say, you're not pre-qualified, are you sure? Like, are you sure you're going to be pre-qualified by the time of the draw? Yeah, demonstrate that. Do that up front. You know, tell me, yeah, we really think that we're going to be. I'm assuming that you're not going to submit an application if you don't actually think you're going to be on the draw or on the board meeting on March 21st and actually be pre-qualified by April 12th. If you have a resident that you're claiming MIVEDA points for and they have to be pre-qualified, the same thing will apply. If the only difference is that they're not pre-qualified in time, and then you think that they're going to be pre-qualified by the time of the draw, you can submit that. What will happen is that if they don't make it and aren't pre-qualified to this question online, you get to the draw and you're pre-qualified, sure, but the resident that you're claiming MIVEDA points for is not pre-qualified. We're not going to throw away their application, but we could not award that MIVEDA point. Okay, more questions? Yes.
Did I understand you to say that the last state board meeting before the draw is March 21st, so if you're not pre-qualified by then, you're probably not going to be?
Right now, the MMLB's meeting is scheduled for March 21st, and that's the last one before the draw, yes. So we should know on March 22nd if some of those applications aren't going to make it into the draw. But I'll still review for completeness. I'll still assume that if you're not pre-qualified, I'll assume that you're going to try to get onto that board meeting or that you have a reasonable expectation of being on there. And we'll watch. I mean, heck,
the governor
last week's had 90 pre-qualification requirements or requests, so I know they're running them through. The governor's executive order this morning, that I think we got the notice right before this meeting, was that she signed an executive order saying I'm disbanding the MMLB, and will make all this process administrative. But that won't go into effect if it goes into effect for 60 days. So we'll keep an eye on it. I don't see it affecting this process under this current timeline.
Okay, so theoretically, the state board's gonna be gone and it's just gonna be.
Yeah, theoretically, you know, after 60 days from today, if the executive order goes through, then the state MOB would no longer be
But that doesn't
existing.
really do any good for this process.
It doesn't do any good for this process. Any other questions? People have asked me, can I have a pre-application meeting? I don't have any more availability this week. In fact, I have one more meeting after this meeting today. I'll try to fit you in if I can. We don't know what to expect as far as volume of applications. If we have less applications than we believe we're going to have, we may have some time. And I'll try to fit you in as I can. I know pre-application consultation is a requirement for application. So I get it that if you haven't had it yet, you're scrambling and you're going to be desperate. And I respect that, and I want to help and fit you in. I'll do my best. I think everyone here mostly has met me, so that's good. If you haven't, let's set that up. But after today, it's going to be on a if I can basis, and I can't guarantee anything. Not seeing any more questions online. Any more questions? We're at 2:15, so hey, that's early. So maybe I can fit in one more pre-application meeting today. Yeah,
Just
Annette.
on behalf of Neighborhood Works, we are working really hard to fit everybody in. But it's been very difficult trying, especially if you're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of properties available.
Yeah.
And so it's not that we don't want to see you come in, but at the same time, we only have so many hours in a day.
Sure.
And we have a very small staff, sometimes only one person on staff.
Okay.
And so just please be patient with us. We're doing the very best we can to
Yep.
accommodate everyone and give you the time that you're needed. But also because most of these do not fall within our grant dollars, we're having to charge for the time that we're spending on these. So it's not because, we're not trying to make money on it, we're just trying to cover our staff's time. So I just wanted to.
So can I reiterate, especially for those online?
Yes.
Neighborhood organizers saying, yes, we're doing our best, and we understand the pressure. But especially in neighborhoods, in your neighborhood, West Grand, you have a lot of requests. You're getting through them as fast as you can, and as well as you can. You understand, and the neighborhoods generally, you know, have been in contact with me, have said, what's my responsibility here? In some cases, they are charging fees for services. It's legal. It's possible. It's happening. It's a transaction between you as a practitioner and the neighborhood organization that you deal with privately. But those are fees for services related to exactly this. It's not just for marijuana,
Nope.
right? It's for any development request. And so the neighborhoods, for those of you listening, they're working at it. They're trying to get through, and they understand that the signature is just a saying, yes, we've done some engagement. We're still going to do some engagement. We're in process, but recognizing it to the city and potentially other applicants too. Good comment. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So like I said, good luck. We're interested to see what happens here. Please email me and let me know if you have more questions. I'll do my best to get back to you. A phone call isn't so good. Email, I can respond to you after hours. I was responding to people at 11 o'clock last night, so I'm happy to do that. Like I said, we'll just, if we don't have the volume that we expect as a potential max volume, then we'll have a little more time to still respond next week, but no guarantees. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lana.